An accountant and financial professional's success today may depend to a large degree on how well he or she interacts with others on a daily basis. Because each exchange has the potential of working for or against the accountant in achieving the results he or she desires, knowing how to communicate effectively in your day-to-day interactions with others is key to increasing your ability to achieve personal, professional, and organizational success. We judge ourselves by our intent, but others judge us by our impact. Now, unfortunately, there are times when our impact on others doesn't match our intent. This often leads to interpersonal stress, miscommunication, and poor results. In order to obtain mutual understanding and positive results, one must not only see the interaction from his or her perspective, but accounting and financial managers must also put themselves in the shoes of the receiver. This is what we call interpersonal adaptability. Therefore, interpersonal adaptability is a method of communication that synchronizes understanding and produces mutual gain. The foundation to interpersonal adaptability is made up of three critical components: attitude, awareness, and ability. All three must be present and in play in order to achieve interpersonal effectiveness. It is the interplay among these three key ingredients that unlocks the ability to have productive and healthy interactions with others. Their synergistic relationship is the essence of interpersonal adaptability. With us today is Dr. Dave Mignonis, an expert in this area. He is the managing partner of Humanetrics, a global training and consulting firm that specializes in personal, interpersonal, and leadership skills. He is also an adjunct professor at George Washington University, where he teaches a group dynamics course. Dr. Mignonis has extensive experience in professional and organizational effectiveness and plays an integral role as a trusted business advisor to many clients. Our own Rebecca Saran recently met with Dr. Mignonis to learn more about interpersonal adaptability.
Dave, I want to welcome you to the program this month.
Thanks, Becky. I appreciate you having me here today.
Dave, let's start right at the beginning. What is interpersonal adaptability?
Well, interpersonal adaptability is the ability to read a situation, understand your audience, understand the situation that surrounds it, so that you're able to respond appropriately to the situation and your audience. So interpersonal adaptability directly links to communication with each other. And to me, that's the lifeblood of any organization. It's how you transfer knowledge. It's how you influence other people.
Okay, I think I understand what you're saying, but tell me, why is interpersonal adaptability important?
To grow, to compete, to succeed and exceed, to even, in some cases, survive. You know, Darwin has a quote that says that it's not the strongest of species that survive, but the one that's most responsive to change. And those people who in organizations can do this effectively, those are the ones that rise to the top in the organizations. And to be honest with you, the organizations that do this well are the ones that are constantly outperforming their competition. And I believe that interpersonal adaptability is the single biggest factor in determining someone's success. It's very important in technical jobs like accounting organizations, professional services firm, finances, engineering organizations. To me, it's a difference maker because those people that are able to take the numbers and work the numbers, but then able to communicate it to other people effectively, those are the people that succeed. In today's competitive and dynamic business environment that we're in, many organizations have made huge investments in tools and technologies that are going to allow them to support and expand and even provoke collaboration and communication. But these very technologies do nothing to mitigate the problems, the basic fundamental problems that they're supposed to solve. And those things, what I'm talking about here is human interconnectivity. Specifically, I'm referring to the ability of people to communicate with others at a human level.
Can you talk more about human interconnectivity and the role it plays in the organization? What do you mean exactly by communicate on a human level?
Great question, Becky. What I'm saying, what I mean by that is what people say and how people write things and what people do so that they gain mutual understanding. It's also being aware of all the messaging that you're giving off to people. When we communicate to people and we're trying to understand someone's message, we're looking for a lot of things. We're looking for the verbals. What are the words that they're saying? And many times that's what we really only focus on. That's what we're trained in school. but it only accounts for about 7 to 10% of helping me understand your message. Other things that play into the messaging is the vocals, the tone. How's your tone coming across? And that could help me understand where this is coming from. And finally, visuals, the nonverbals, the things that you're giving off with your body language, and sometimes you're not even aware that you're giving off those kind of things.
Dave, isn't effective communication just treating the other person the way you'd want to be treated? I mean, that's what I always thought.
Becky, that's a great question, and I often get that, which is you just told me about the golden rule, to treat the other person how you want to be treated. But if you think about it, there's a flaw in the golden rule, and we all think we're doing it well if we're doing the golden rule. But the flaw is, what if they don't want to be treated like I want to be treated? The best way to do it is it's a simple mind shift, and it's going to make the world of difference between you being about 20 to 25% successful with people to about 90% successful. And that mind shift is, rather than treat the other person how you want to be treated, what I'd like you to do is treat the other person how they want to be treated. And that's what I'm calling the platinum rule.
Well, I think I understand and it makes sense. So what gets in the way of applying the platinum rule?
There are a lot of things that could get in the way of applying the platinum rule. For instance, self-talk. When we're having this interaction like we are right now, how many conversations do you think are going on? There are actually 3 conversations that are going on. There's a conversation that if someone was around us right now, they'd be hearing that conversation. That's the first conversation. The second conversation is the conversation I'm having with myself in my head, and the third conversation is the conversation you're having with yourself in your head. And if you're wondering, what is this guy talking about? That little voice that just said, what is this guy talking about? Is that little voice in your head that I'm talking about. So that self-talk can get in the way of an interaction. It could be very distracting. It's almost like a little gremlin in your head that are saying things that perhaps are inappropriate. When we all at times have inappropriate thoughts. Now, we do have something that helps us with this, and I call this the social filter. It prevents those inappropriate thoughts coming out into the public conversation. However, we probably all know people who don't have very good filters. Maybe at one point in our life we didn't have a very good filter. But the filter hopefully prevents those inappropriate thoughts from getting out there. So what you want to do is say things more tactfully, or in some cases, don't say anything at all. Another thing that might get in the way of the platinum rule would be things like not being able to empathize with other people. So putting yourself in the other person's shoes to really understand how they're going to be receiving that message from you. And saying things in a way that can best be heard from that other person.
Well, when it comes to communication, Dave, do you feel that different people communicate in different ways?
Absolutely, absolutely. Nearly about half a century of research has shown that different people are out there, and there are actually identified 4 different communication styles. This IO psychologist named William Martson was looking at people in the business environment, and he said, there are so many different types of personalities out there, there's got to be a way that we can kind of harness it and put our arms around it and understand people. And from that, he came up with 2 very distinct dimensions. The first dimension he called interpersonal approach. On one end of the scale are people who are very direct, and on the other end of the scale are people who are more indirect. People who are direct tend to be more candid communicators. People on the indirect side tend to be more cautious communicators. And then the other scale he looked at was the one he called interpersonal display. So it's people who are more reserved in how they display their emotions, and people on the other end of the scale are people who are very animated. Now, I'm not saying that some people are emotional and other people have no emotions. Everyone has emotions. What we're looking at here is actually the display of your emotions. And the people who are reserved tend to be more task-oriented. The people that are on the animated side tend to be more people-oriented.
Well, when you look at Marston's 2 approaches, how can you tell what someone's preference is?
That's a great question, Becky. What we need to do is we need to look at their interpersonal behavior that they're giving off when we're interacting with them. So we're going to go back to those verbal, those vocal, and those visuals. So verbally, people on the direct side will typically talk more, tell more, make more statements. People on the indirect side tend to ask more questions. Vocally, people on the direct side tend to have a louder volume, faster pace of speech, come across as more forceful. People on the indirect side, listen to my voice, they tend to have a more methodical pace of speech, a quieter volume. And then the visuals we're looking at, people on the direct side tend to have direct eye contact. So in the interaction with another person, they're honed in on your eyes the entire time, as opposed to someone on the indirect side may have intermittent eye contact. You're asking them a question, they'll think, they'll look away, they'll reconnect with you back and forth. People on the direct side tend to be more spatially in the conversation. So they lean into the conversation. They're close talkers, as opposed to people on the indirect side tend to lean back. They tend to be very aware of the spatial issue, and they tend to back off people and give that space to other people. So those are some things that will help you identify between where someone falls on the direct side and the indirect side. And then if you look at the other scale that William Martin came up with, the reserved versus animated, again, we look at those verbal, visual, and vocals. Verbally, people on the reserved side tend to be very formal, have very formal conversation. Like the words that they choose are very formal and proper. People on the indirect side have a much more casual language. So you're coming out of a meeting and you may ask the person, what do you think of the meeting? Someone on the reserved side may respond, I thought that meeting was very productive. As opposed to someone on the animated side may say, that was a really cool meeting. Now, cool is not necessarily a technical term, a formal term, business-like term, but they'll use that kind of slang more readily than someone on the reserve side. Like I said, people on the task side, on the reserve side, tend to be more task-oriented and use facts and data as descriptors. People on the animated side are more people-oriented and use stories and metaphors as descriptors. Facially, you look at the facial expressions. People on the reserve side are very facially controlled. There's not a lot of movement. I call it the Botox face. It's like there's not a lot of facial muscle firing going on there. As opposed to the people on the animated side, there's a lot of movement and animation in their face. Pitch variance, so you listen to the vocals. People on the reserve side are more monotone. And I'm not saying they talk like a robot like this with no pitch variance whatsoever. We're humans. But they're more business, the tone is, and the demeanor is more business-like, as opposed to someone on the animated side that come across with a friendlier tone.
So what are the different communication styles?
Well, there are 4 different communication styles. They're labeled differently from different organizations like DISC and social styles and things like that. But what I call them are the eye-to-eye communication, and they all start with the letter I. So the first one is what I call the implementer style. So this is someone who is direct and someone who is more reserved, more task-oriented. And some things that would describe someone who is an implementer are they're very practical and they're serious and they're candid. They tend to be very resourceful people and they're very determined. They're fast-paced and they tend to be more independent and very efficient with their time.
How about some examples so the viewers can better understand what you mean? Who are some famous people who fall into this communication style?
So I would think that some people who might be implementers that are famous would be Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, Whoopi Goldberg from The View, General Patton. So these are all individuals that would fall into the implementer communication style.
So that's the implementer style. What other styles are there?
Another style, which is diagonally opposite to the implementer, okay? When I say diagonally opposite, I mean that instead of direct, they're indirect. Instead of reserved, they're animated. So someone is indirect and animated is what I call the interrelator style. And these people tend to be very dedicated and very respectful and diplomatic. Of all the 4 styles, they're the most people-oriented. They're very cooperative and supportive and tend to be very casual. And some people that would fall into this category would be people like Ronald Reagan or Tom Hanks or Princess Diana or the actor Owen Wilson. Then the third style, which is also people-oriented but a more direct approach to it, is what I call the innovator style. And innovators are enthusiastic and stimulating, forceful and spontaneous. They tend to be very personable and very promotional and creative. Some people that you would know that would fall into this category would be Bill Clinton and Mark Cuban from Shark Tank, or Winston Churchill, or Robin Williams was a perfect example of an innovator style.
So we've got the implementer, the interrelator, and the innovator styles. Dave, what's the 4th and last style?
The last style is what we call the investigator style. So again, this is someone that's indirect and reserved or task-oriented. And some descriptors of the investigator would be methodical and very orderly. They're thoughtful, but when I say thoughtful, not like the interrelator, like caring thoughtful. They're more thoughtful from the perspective of that they like to have things well laid out and thought through before they go into any kind of action mode. They tend to be more serious and industrious. They're formal and very disciplined. And some famous people that would fall into this category would be our current President Barack Obama, Phil Jackson, the coach, Al Gore, and the typical Spock from Star Trek.
So now that you've discussed the 4 communication styles, can you explain how does interpersonal adaptability link to style?
How does interpersonal adaptability link to style? Well, the way I look at it is this, Becky, is that when you interact with another person, every key relationship that you have is like a bank account. So look at it like a bank account. It's an interpersonal bank account. And it's your job, if you have a bank account, what do you want to do? To create a healthy bank account, you want to make deposits and you want to avoid withdrawals. And so it's your job to make as many deposits into the bank account. When I say deposit, I mean it's things like that would be endorsed by that other individual. So things that you would say or actions that you would do that the other person would appreciate. Withdrawals would be things that would irritate that person. So you want to avoid withdrawals. For every one of your key relationships, you need to figure out what is a deposit for that person and what are the withdrawals for that person. Make as many deposits as you can and avoid withdrawals.
Can you provide me with some examples of deposits and withdrawals for each communication style?
Sure. So for instance, for the implementer style, some deposits would be like speed and progress updates and the bottom line. And withdrawals for the implementer, things that would irritate them would be small talk and people who are unfocused and indecision. For the innovator style, deposits would be things like having fun and creativity and enthusiasm, whereas withdrawals for the innovator would be things like too much detail, tunnel vision, being unappreciated by other people. For the interrelator style, deposits might be loyalty and trust, valuing people and cooperation, whereas withdrawals for the interrelator would be things like rudeness and lack of teamwork and conflict. And finally, the investigator, deposits would be providing details and time to think, and accuracy is really important to them. And withdrawals for the investigator would be disregarding quality, unreliable data, low standards.
Let me ask you, David, have you ever made a deposit that didn't work?
Yes, unfortunately, everyone makes deposits that don't work. And here's what happens is when it hasn't worked for me, it was because I thought it was a deposit. But to be honest with you, the other person didn't think it was a deposit. And what's more important is not whether you think it's a deposit or a withdrawal, it's whether they think it's a deposit or a withdrawal. Like for instance, Becky, if I gave you 100 Brazilian reais, okay, handed this money to you as a deposit, and you're never planning on going to Brazil, that's meaningless to you. It's like it doesn't have any value for me. But if we at break talked about, I found out that you collect foreign currency and you're missing some currency from South America, and one of them is Brazil. Now I give you 100 Brazilian reais. It's important to you. It's a deposit. So I need to find out what are those things that are important to that other person, those behaviors, how I communicate with them, and those are deposits for that person. So that's when it hasn't worked for me, is when I thought it was a deposit, but it really wasn't a deposit for them. The other time it hasn't worked for me is when it's done insincerely. When it's done because I'm forcing it and I'm trying to do it to make the connection with the person, but I really don't believe it inside, and it's not natural to who I am. And when it's not natural to who you are, it doesn't come across as very sincere, and it usually doesn't work.
But when it comes to interpersonal adaptability, are people born with the ability to do this, or is it learned?
That's a question that a lot of people ask, Becky. Some people are genetically wired to be outgoing, to be smart from an IQ standpoint, but interpersonal adaptability is not about IQ smart, and it's not about being outgoing. It's about being tactful, and it's about being appropriate. And this is something that you can definitely learn. So it's not something that you're born with, but it's something that can be taught to somebody. When we're talking about interpersonal adaptability, we're talking about three things. We're talking about a person's awareness, we're talking about a person's ability, and we're talking about a person's attitude, those three things. So for instance, awareness, it's knowing yourself and knowing how you react to different situations. You may think you're being a certain way, but if you're coming across another way to other individuals, that's how you're coming across to them. Unfortunately, we judge ourselves on our intent, but others judge us on our impact. So for instance, if my intent is to be candid, that's good. But if I'm coming across as being rude and blunt, that's not good. And so it's my awareness that that's how sometimes I come across, to harness myself back in, so that when I'm trying to be candid, I'm not going to the extreme version of it where I'm appearing rude or blunt and insincere. The ability part is the ability to leverage different interpersonal strategies with people, knowing how to build trust with people, knowing how to empathize with people, knowing the different deposits and withdrawals that we just talked about for the different communication styles. But it doesn't have to necessarily just relate to communication styles. It could relate to generational differences within organizations and how to connect better with the different generations. It could be gender differences. It could be cultural differences. So me being aware of my audience, so I'm being most appropriate to that individual that I'm communicating with. And then the last component is the attitude component. And that's actually choosing to do it. Choosing to be positive, optimistic, and proactive. You making the choice. Because every time you get into an interaction with another individual, there's a chance of you having a terrific interaction or a toxic interaction. And so when you realize it becomes toxic, when I say toxic, I mean that your style-related behaviors are jeopardizing the productivity of the interaction, you need to start adjusting yourself and adapting so that you can salvage that interaction.
Okay, I think you did a great job of explaining the three components, but what if you have only two of the three?
So if you have two of the three, so the three again are awareness, ability, and attitude, and if you have two, you don't have adaptability. You're not going to have that effectiveness. Like for instance, let's assume that I have ability. And let's assume that I have attitude. I want to be effective with you. I'll do the right things. I'll make that effort. But maybe I tend to be a very fast talker. And to be honest with you, I actually am a little bit of a fast talker. And so I'm in this interaction with you, having a conversation, talking very fast, and I get really excited about something, and I talk even faster when I come up with new ideas. Now, what if fast talking irritates you, but I wasn't aware of that? Okay, so I'm lacking awareness that fast talking, I need to slow it down. And so I didn't adapt because I didn't know I should be adapting. Now, if you said, Dave, time out, could you slow down for me? I love your ideas, but I appreciate if you could I need time to marinate on those ideas, and I feel like it's coming at me a mile a minute. Could you slow it down for me? I certainly would have slowed it down because my attitude was there. But not knowing that fast talking irritates you, I won't have adaptability because I didn't know that I should be adapting. Or you could be missing the ability part. Here's a situation where maybe I walk into an implementer's office who is a no-nonsense person, and on a Monday morning, and I start talking about my weekend with them. And they have a lot of things on their plate. They're trying to get things done. I didn't know the strategy, which is, for the implementer, I need to parachute in like a Navy SEAL, do what I need to do, and hightail out of there. Now, that's not how I typically operate, because I'm an innovator, and I tend to have a lot of relationships, build relationships, and personal stories and things like that. But I would totally irritate an implementer if I approached them like that. So lacking the strategy for how to be effective with another communication style, I didn't adapt because I didn't know how to adapt. And finally, the last thing is lacking attitude. To me, those people choose not to adapt. They actually can adapt, but they don't make the energy and effort to adapt. So you actually have to have all three synergistically working together. And that's why my people equation is a multiplier. It's awareness times ability times attitude equals interpersonal adaptability. And we all know that any multiple of 0 is 0. So if any one of those components is not there, you won't have adaptability.
Well, you said that interpersonal adaptability is about being appropriate. How do you ensure that?
How you ensure appropriateness is, I think we all have something inside, it's called a social radar. And many of us don't even have it on, so we need to turn that switch on. And that allows us to ping out to the rest of the world, to the environment that we're in, to the audiences that we interact with. How am I being appropriate to this situation? So it's your feedback mechanism. And when I say feedback, here are things that you're looking for being appropriate to. You're looking for being appropriate to your image. If I came to this interview in a tie-dye shirt and my hair was down to here, I had piercings all over my body and things like that, that's a certain image I portray. Would that image be appropriate for this kind of interview? No, it wouldn't. Would it be appropriate for a Grateful Dead concert? Perhaps. So you want to make sure that your image is appropriate for the situation. You know, same thing, at your desk at work, is your desk cluttered? Well, that creates an image that you're a messy, disorganized person. Is that the image that you want? So we're constantly looking at how our image matches the situation. So that could be one thing that we're trying to be appropriate to. Another thing might be language, the language we choose. I think people talk from a different language. And so what you need to be aware of who your audience is and speak to them in the language that's most comfortable to them. When I say language, I'm not talking about foreign language. I'm talking about words that resonate with those different individuals. Like, for instance, we talked about the implementer, words like bottom line and goals, things like that, timeline. Those are things that resonate with those individuals, those implementers. And so it's me specifically choosing certain words and saying it in a way, my tone as well, in a way that connects with that other individual. And lastly, I'm also looking at being appropriate to knowledge. So as I'm sharing information with another person, a lot of times in organizations we have these things called TLAs. Call them TLAs, or three-letter acronyms. And we talk in acronyms and jargon and words that, if a person's not from your department, they might not understand what you're talking about. So it's about really understanding your audience and communicating the knowledge to them in a way that they can best understand it.
Is there a way to quantify interpersonal adaptability? How do you measure someone's interpersonal adaptability?
Well, Becky, we actually have a tool. It's a multi-rater tool that people go through, and they have other people fill it out on you. Because what's interesting is there are a lot of tools that are out there that are self-evaluations, but it's hard for you to get interpersonal adaptability and effectiveness score when you're rating yourself. Everyone thinks they're great communicators, but the real truth is, how do other people see you? So when you get that rating, what we do is it allows us to generate a narrative profile on you that will not only identify your communication style, but also will indicate what is your interpersonal adaptability overall score, and also break it down with awareness, ability, and attitude.
Dave, what are some best practices of interpersonal adaptability?
Well, Becky, what I would say first is to use your energy wisely. For you to adapt to somebody else, it takes energy and effort, because you're going out of what you're comfortable doing. And so you want to make sure that in a day, if you know that you have a critical meeting in the afternoon, that you're making sure you've reserved energy for that meeting so you can adapt to that key relationship that you have at the end of the day. So use your energy wisely and be aware that it does take energy and effort to adapt. I'd also say that once you identify what are the deposits and withdrawals in all of your key relationships, to make those deposits to avoid withdrawals. You want to be positive. You want to be optimistic. You want to be proactive. Many times when interactions don't go well, we tend to finger point. We look at the other person saying it's caused by them. But it takes two to make a conversation. So maybe there are things that we can do and adjust to create a healthy, productive interaction. And then once you're doing it well, start to infect other people with your approach, because they'll start seeing that you're doing something for them, and when you do something for that other person, they're going to be more willing to do something back for you. And now we're meeting at this middle ground and working with each other effectively. And lastly, I'd say that the more you do it, the easier it gets. It's like any skill. It's like going to the gym and working out. It's like first time driving a car. You were terrified behind the wheel. But now you drive a car, and sometimes you drive to a location and you don't even think about it as you're driving. Well, same thing with interpersonal adaptability. The more you do this, the easier it gets, I promise. The more you do this, the easier it gets. But the only way for it to get that way is by practicing and practicing and practicing.
Well, you know our audience consists of a lot of accounting and financial managers. What recommendations would you have for accounting and finance departments if they want to make some progress in this area? What steps should they take as an organization?
Great question, Becky. I've worked with accounting departments, financial departments within various organizations, and I found that the way to start is you have to get people thinking differently. You have to get people aware of how they're communicating to other people. Not just what they say, but how they say it. When you communicate with people, you have to be able to start reading other people, their body language, so that when you interact with them, you're communicating and gaining that mutual understanding with that individual.
But what are the challenges that accounting and finance managers face in doing that?
One of the most challenging things that someone faces within an accounting department is taking their knowledge of working the numbers and then communicating that information to other people in the organization. And so knowing how to understand your audience and knowing how to send that messaging to other people so that they understand it, because you have that technical knowledge and you have that accounting background, but the other people don't have that information. And so if you can translate that accounting knowledge in a way to the layman, in a way that they can best understand it, that's when you're going to be really successful.
Is there any other unique challenge for accounting and finance managers?
Yes, and the challenge of this, a lot of times people in those organizations, in those situations, in those departments, they move up the ranks because of their technical expertise, which is wonderful. They do their job really well. But all of a sudden now they're being put in positions, in leadership positions, in supervisory positions, where all of a sudden it's a different skill set that's going to allow you and to be successful in those organizations. And those are the people skill set. I'm not discarding the technical expertise. That's still important. But now you have this additional layer that you're going to have to be successful. And that's where this whole interpersonal adaptability comes into play.
Well, Dave, you covered a lot of ground today. Can you give us a final thought on the subject?
A final thought. How about a quote from Maya Angelou, which is, people will forget what you said, and people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And it's all about how you make people feel when you interact with them. If you communicate effectively with them, if you gain that mutual understanding, they'll feel that they gain something from that interaction. And both of you will be walking away from that interaction feeling that you got productive results.
Dave, I want to thank you for being here today.
Becky, I appreciate you having me here.